Every day, Ameren, Illinois works to deliver reliable energy throughout the state to on-the-go families, in-the-know grandparents, and busy students. But did you know we also have ways to manage your energy? Paperless billing, outage notifications, pick a due date, auto pay, and so much more. So no matter who you are or how you use your energy, there's an option that's right for you. Learn more at amerenillinois.com/options.
Hello again, everybody, and welcome to the Keith Costas podcast. I'm Bob Ramsey, your host, and there's our star, Keith Costas, of course, analyst for MLB Network. Keith, how you doing today?
I'm good, Rammer. It would be a little better if this Cardinal Brewer series was off to a little better start, but all things considered, I'm all right.
Well, folks up in Wisconsin think it's off to a great start, and so I guess it depends on your zip code a little bit, and we may circle back to that, although it kind of goes into the one topic I wanted to get with you about, and that is National League wild card, not so much where the Cardinals are kind of up and down, trying to hang in there maybe with false hope for their fans. I don't know. We'll talk about it. But it's that the Padres, to me, it's that the Padres are sort of letting go of the grip they had on one of the wild card spots. And I think it gives everybody else with hopes, real or imagined, an opportunity to try and stay involved.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if there's one thing I've learned, Rammer, in about a decade working at MLB Network and in the media, it's that a week is a lifetime and you're allowed to change your opinion. So I'm going to completely pivot off of what we talked about last time about the Padres. You know, we were talking about adding Frazier and all these interchangeable pieces and how they've got such a deep bench and they can mix and match and survive injuries, so on and so forth. But you look at how the last couple of weeks has gone for them, and I know it's been kind of a slow burn. They haven't been as hot during the summer as they were those first couple months of the season, but they've changed the mix of what they had so much, and they just don't have any traction. You know, it's kind of interesting. You look at these teams that are in the wild card race, and the Padres are really the only one that have been able to do anything against 500 plus teams, against winning teams. Now, a lot of that is they've had plenty of opportunities with how good the top of the NL West has been.
Yeah.
But then you look at the flip side of it, the last couple of weeks, in the last 10 days, they lose 7 of 8 games to the Rockies and the D-backs. I mean, they just can't take care of business against the bottom of that division. And when you're going out and signing Jake Arrieta for a rotation that was supposed to be able to match the Dodgers as one of the best, not just in the game this year, but in recent memory. I mean, they looked like they were putting together a juggernaut to the point where they had, you know, Denilson Lamet and Mike Clevenger, guys that were in the mix for the Cy Young conversation last year, albeit in a shortened season. People were acting like, well, that's just a bonus for down the road. They've got more than enough for this year. And now you look at what they're trying to do with their pitching. It's, you know, it's a far cry from where we thought they were in the beginning of the season. And you're right. I mean, we thought this was a 3-team lock from the NL West. The wild card was basically over. You'd have to win the Central or the East, but all of a sudden, all of these teams have a little bit of an opening. Even the Cardinals, for as much as they've struggled, still have a shot to get into that mix. So it's kind of baffling to see the Padres kind of choke away what looked like a stranglehold on at least a shot at a one-game playoff to get into the bigger dance. And I don't think anybody could have seen this coming from the Padres.
Yeah, so how do we explain it with the pitching? How do you pinpoint a couple of things, and can they be addressed, and are they fixable in the last 6 weeks of the year?
I don't know how you're going to fix Blake Snell. I mean, it's hard to figure what's happened to him. Obviously, in the last couple of years in Tampa, he was not quite what he was in that Cy Young season. It's becoming clearer as we get further away from that Cy Young campaign in him, then that might have been an outlier. That obviously he has it in the tank. He proved it for a full season with one of the lowest ERAs we've seen in the American League in recent memory. And obviously he was good down the stretch last year in the playoffs too. Everyone remembers what happened with him coming out of the game early, but he's just completely fallen apart in San Diego. And it's kind of tough to figure. You know, same thing with Darvish. He's taken a step back. His numbers are much better than Snell's, but he hasn't been what he looked like he had refound during the back end of his time with the Cubs. And, you know, now he's on the IL too. So they've had some injury issues out there, which has not been something that's unique to Darvish. There's been a handful of San Diego pitchers, like we discussed earlier, that have dealt with some arm issues over the last handful of years. So you wonder maybe if it's something about the way they're doing things there in terms of not being able to keep that pitching staff healthy. But yeah, it's kind of tough to put your finger on exactly what's happened out there. And Joe Musgrove is still a guy, but, all of a sudden you look at that rotation and it looked like they had 3 or 4 options that you'd be comfortable with in a one-game playoff and more than enough to get through a short series. And it really only feels like Musgrove is the guy that they can count on to give him some quality innings. So, yeah, I don't see how you like, even if they make it in, I don't see how you would project the Padres to be a favorite in any of the teams they would potentially match up with in the playoffs.
When you talk about Blake Snell, and I would defer to real analysis, like you do, as opposed to some of the anecdotal stuff that I see. But you can go through the history of the game and find guys that had unbelievable years and often out of nowhere. And it's almost like it takes everything they have to be that good that year. And they have a huge innings pitch total. The ERA is low, tons of strikeouts, and they're Cy Young or certainly among the best in the league on that given year. And then they never come close again. I'm not saying that will be Snell, but I've seen it often through the history of baseball, that the guys that do it year after year, Bob Gibson, Juan Marichal, Steve Carlton, and the guys historically, they're more the aberration than you'll see, somebody, he won a Cy Young Award. I never heard of him. And you look him up and he had, where God has reached down and touched his arm for 1 year.
Right.
And then it's all gone. And when I see things like what's happening with Snell, I wonder.
Yeah. I mean, just the same thing with his new rotation mate, Jake Arrieta. I mean, if you look at his baseball reference page in 20 years, people aren't going to have any idea, even with the bold type from that 2015 season and what he did for the 16 championship Cubs. You're just not, unless you were there and watching how he dominated in that second half, it's just not going to make sense that this guy was talked about as, for a 30, 40, 50 start stretch, as good as anybody we've ever seen in the history of the game. So I'm with you. That's definitely more the norm than the opposite. But the other thing you got to consider with Snell, I'm just thinking this off the top of my head while we're talking here. I think a lot of people thought getting out of Tampa, just because of the way things happen in that World Series and all the drama surrounding that decision from Cash, people just assumed, maybe a clean break and a fresh start where he's not kind of in that Tampa system would be a good thing for him. But then you look at the flip side of that and you think about Willy Adames and some of the kind of commentary around him that he's talked about, and just looking at the numbers. Getting out of Tampa as a place that's kind of a underrated, difficult place to hit. And it's kind of funny thinking about going from Tampa to a place like Petco that used to be a pitcher's heaven. It's not quite the pitcher's park that it was the first 10, 15 years of that park's existence in recent years. Some of the construction that's gone on, and they moved the fences in. There's just a lot of different dynamics at play. But, same thing with Nelson Cruz. He had some good early moments, but you look at some of the underlying data in terms of chasing balls out of the strike zone, contact rate in the strike zone. There's something about hitting in Tampa that is tough. The lighting, the backdrop, I don't know what it is, but the numbers are kind of starting to back up that narrative that Tampa is not exactly a hitter's haven. So, you figure the flip side has to be true, and maybe getting out of Tampa and going to San Diego, not to mention the competition they're facing in that division, that's been probably a tough thing for Snell as well.
Around the rest of the National League, I try to see who's legit. And the Reds are a fascinating team. When they got all their guys in the lineup, it's pretty good. And that's with a Suarez whose living nightmare continues, and it's hard to explain. But even with that, their top 4 or 5 guys are really, really good. Yet they've got missing pieces. The Cardinals we talked about are trying to hang in there. They don't hit. Are the Braves? It seems like the Braves have put their grip on the East, but the Mets and the Phillies still believe that they can be postseason. And I'm wondering if the East is where the Padres' real competition is going to come from.
Yeah, that might be. But like we talked about earlier, these teams, at least in the short term, the last week or so, just can't separate. Philly won 8 in a row. Now they've lost 6 of their last 8 since that streak. The Mets have just offensively, not to mention they're missing DeGrom, obviously, which is going to be tough to overcome. Taijuan Walker's kind of regressed in the second half after a huge second half, but you've got the owner tweeting about the offensive approach and being one-dimensional. Well, maybe Javi Baez wasn't the guy to go out and get if you think that's the issue with your team and talk about a one-dimensional hitter. So, yeah, those teams in the East, they've got their flaws too, like you mentioned. And I think the Braves, what they've done, obviously not their best season and with the success they've had recently, but you've got to give them a ton of credit for not letting go of the rope, like we talked about earlier with the Padres. I mean, how many
Yeah.
times? I think it was 12, 13, 14 times they got to 500 and couldn't get over the hump. And now you look up at the standings and they're somewhere around 10 games over 500 all of a sudden, without Acuna, without a good first half from Freeman, who's obviously turned it around and somehow put himself in the MVP conversation after having a 220, 230 batting average fairly deep into the summer. The Braves just being able to be resilient and power through this somehow and get that lead in the East has been very impressive. And I think they're going to eventually run away with this division. I mean, the teams are still bunched up. I think they have a 3.5 game lead right now, but the Braves are the best team to me in that division with some momentum with how they've played recently. So, yeah, if I was the Padres, I think I might still be worried about Philly and the Mets as my chief competition. But that NL East has just been, even when the Mets had that long stretch of 3 months or so when they were in first place, they did not have the best record in the division throughout that. It was just that nobody could separate. So the NL East has been a frustrating division to watch, but given what the Padres have done, like we discussed, I guess it's possible they could still end up with 2 teams in, which would be quite the shock given where they were at about 6 weeks ago or so.
It really would. It really would. Let's shift a little bit and go to some more newsy kind of stuff, especially since our pal Lance Lynn decided to get involved and talking about pitchers, sticky stuff. The story kind of almost just kind of gone away. Looked like, okay, we'll check these guys randomly. We'll get them when they come into a game, blah, blah, blah. Okay, seems like it's working. And now it's stirred up again.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of amazing. I mean, those couple ejections last night and the one with Lynn, I mean, to get any more Lance Lynn than that, to throwing your belt out like that, a little ridiculous. He got ejected, but I enjoyed it as an unbiased observer, kind of a humorous situation with Lance.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it's funny, Rammer. I mean, there was so much conversation about it, and I think warranted conversation when you look at the way things were trending and some of the numbers. They did a pretty good job, I think, of just scaring pitchers straight, basically, by just saying, we're going to enforce the rules. How much time did we waste talking about all the different implications and all the different possible solutions? Well, it turns out that the solution might have just been saying, we're going to play by the rule book, because you look at some of these numbers, the batting average is up about 12 points since they started the crackdown in early June. The ERAs are up about a third of the run, OPS about 40 points, the whiff rate, I mean, all across the board. You look at every number, and it's hard not to see that when they announced this crackdown, that made a significant impact, and that offense, this isn't 90s steroids ball or anything, but the offense has definitely picked up in the last couple of months. And I think even more interesting than the couple ejections that obviously are a reasonable jumping off point to get into this topic, it's that we just saw the first true no-hitter. The Cubs threw the combined no-hitter against the Dodgers, but we just saw the first true no-hitter since before the crackdown. There were 6 in the first, 10 weeks of the season. So, I mean, that kind of told you all you needed to know, that when no-hitters are happening literally every other week, that's something's out of whack. And we just saw our first one in a good long while. A good long while, I guess, at this point qualifies 2 months without a no-hitter. It seems like an eternity the way things were early in the season. So, yeah, I mean, we had those couple ejections last night, and it gives you reason to kind of look back and say, I think they fixed it. For as much as we talked about it, I think it was fixed just like that. So, good to see a little more offense and a little more action back in the game these last couple of weeks.
Yeah, and the Lance Lynns of the world who are a little upset about their personal space being invaded, better get used to it, because, as you say, the numbers show that it's working.
Yep, absolutely. I don't think it's going anywhere. Maybe they'll have a little different protocol of how they check these guys, but yeah, I don't think they're backing off of this or coming to some kind of gentleman's agreement anytime soon. I think they'll just stick with this plan.
Well, it's getting to the point of the year, maybe a tad early, to talk about some candidates for postseason awards. And I bring that up. Pitching makes you think of Shohei Ohtani, who was great again yesterday, and a guy who he could be in line for a number of awards, and having an amazing year offensively, defensively. Is he a guy who could be on a bad team and win everything in sight?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's basically a lock at this point. He's going to win the MVP, but I'm not sure if the casual fan that isn't staying up to watch West Coast baseball realizes just how good this guy's been on the mound. I mean, you mentioned it last time out, how good he was, but it's really the last 6-8 weeks or so, he's pitching at a Cy Young level. I don't think he's going to win the Cy Young necessarily, but you look at some of the odds out in Vegas, and he's creeping up. I think he's maybe the 4th favorite right now. It's still still a pretty long number that he's at, Lance Lynn being the favorite for the American League Cy Young Award. But Ohtani, as good as he's been offensively, and that's obviously been the story, just that a competent pitcher, let alone a dominant one, can do what he's done offensively. He's been just as impressive on the mound, in the second half of the season as he has at the plate. So I know Ohtani's gotten a lot of run, but it's like just when you think you've got a handle on just how special this guy is, he starts doing things that are even more special than the mind can even comprehend. So I think that he's going to be headed towards the American League MVP. He'll probably finish top 5 in Cy Young if he keeps up what he's been doing. And, just an unbelievable season. I think what's fun on the NL side, though, Rammer, you mentioned Ohtani being on a bad team. The people that get caught up in that V and the valuable, and I tend to lean that way too. If you got a Mike Trout season and they're not in the playoffs and it's just so much better than the rest of the league, then fine. But, I would prefer my MVP come from a contender. And I think you look at the National League with Tatis's, injury issues this year. If he has trouble staying on the field the rest of the way, I think it's going to come down to, one of 3 or 4 guys that are all on contending teams with the Freddie Freemans, the Max Muncies, the Bryce Harpers. So kind of fun looking at the NL race and, both in the standings and for the awards, and having some real superstar type players that could end up bringing home the personal hardware based on what they do for their team down the stretch.
Yeah, it will be interesting. And because it is an award upon which it's voted and its opinion, how much does a given voter weigh a guy that put a team on his back versus a guy that was an integral piece to a great lineup? And how does somebody weigh all those things in, or simplify it? The best guy on the best team. To say any of those approaches is wrong is probably not reasonable, because we all think the way we do it is most reasonable. But
right.
But it'll be interesting to see, because you can see these different little arguments being made for different guys.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that. Just one of my pet peeves with MVP discussions. You talk about thinking the way we do it is reasonable. It always cracks me up when people get hung up on where people finish. It's like, well, I wouldn't have voted for him, but he should have finished higher. Well, by definition, if everyone did what you did, it wouldn't have mattered where he finished, because the winner would be unanimous. So it's just kind of a silly exercise that we go through, as fun as it is to talk about. But yeah, a lot of different ways to skin a cat. And with those NL guys, 4 pretty different type of resumes. For Bryce Harper to be legitimately in the mix with 50-something RBIs, that would make people's heads spin 10 years ago, but people don't really bat an eye at it now. And then you've got Freeman, we touched on earlier, basically did nothing the first 3 months of the season, and it's been so good that he's put himself back in that mix. Muncy from the most talented team, and then Tatis with the most outstanding season. So yeah, however voters like to look at it, there's going to be a viable option for each sort of line of thinking on the National League side.
I know there's a lot of talk, and I know so much of the media is New York centric about the Yankees and the way they're playing, and we can talk about that a little bit. Well, in fact, let's start there with the Yankees, and Luke Voit kind of popped off a little bit again.
Yeah.
I didn't see the quote in context, but kind of popped off about how I deserve to play as much as the next guy, meaning Rizzo. Is this a thing that could end up hurting the Yankees along the way? What's sort of the inside talk that you're getting about what's happening there?
Oh, I don't know about hurting the Yankees. Obviously they haven't had to deal with it head on just yet, because part of the reason Rizzo's there is because Boyd hasn't been able to stay on the field. And as soon as Rizzo shows up after a few games, he's on the COVID IL. So they haven't really had to deal with it on a day-to-day basis just yet. I liked Boyd kind of saying what he said. I'm not sure if he needed to necessarily read his resume. We all understand that he's been good the last couple of years for him, and it's not an ideal situation, obviously, when you bring in a player that's as established as Rizzo. But I don't know if you're Luke Voit or a Yankees fan, how you can really have an issue with this. It's just kind of the business of baseball. When you look at where they were in the standings and you look at what's happened since they've made these moves, in the span of a month, we did the Yankees Red Sox doubleheader on Tuesday, and in the span of a month, they essentially closed an 8-game gap with the Red Sox, and a lot of it is because they used to have a lineup that was just so easy to navigate with all those right-handed hitters. The way the term Aaron Boone has been using recently when talking about it is we just had too many lanes for matchups for the opposing bullpen. It was easy for Alex Cora when they matched up to just toss Adam Ottavino into any tough situation and throw a million sliders to right-handed batters, or this Garrett Whitlock kid who's been great for them out of their bullpen, another right-hander. You just plug those guys into any high leverage situation without really worrying about matchups. Now, all of a sudden, Gallo, who obviously is a low batting average guy, but he still draws so many walks, he's going to give you good at bats and pop a few homers here and there. And Rizzo with another left-handed hitter in that lineup. I just think diversifying that lineup has changed the complete complexion of the team. And it's unfortunate for Voit after, you know, the kind of trajectory of his career to go from what he was in St. Louis to leading the New York Yankees in home runs in the entire major leagues in home runs, albeit in the shortened season. I get why that's a tough pill to swallow, obviously. That's not hard to process. But on the flip side, you look at the team and how they've taken off since they sort of introduced this diversity in their lineup. I don't know how you can argue with it. And if Voigt's the odd man out, that's the way it's going to go for this team to maybe have a chance to get in the playoffs, which seemed impossible a month ago.
Yeah, I think I know the answer, but it'd be interesting to see if they want to ever try Gallo in center and Stanton in left and Voit DH.
Yeah,
that would be an interesting, almost murderer's row. But do you give too much up defensively? I'm curious to see how that would look in actual gameplay, not just video play.
Yeah, to me, with that possible scenario, the bigger issue I think is just, can Stanton handle it? Which I know it's kind of a ridiculous thing at $35 million a year. You'd think he could play some left field for you if need be. He was a good athlete, obviously, in his younger days. Everyone knows he was maybe headed to USC to play football. He had a huge arm in the outfield, even if he wasn't a Gold Glover. He was more than a competent right fielder.
Yeah.
And you'd think in the left field, think about some of those parks around the AL East. It's not exactly a ton of space to cover out in left field. You'd think you could stick him out there. And his offense, he's been hitting well the last couple of weeks, so you think his offense would be more than enough to cover that up. But I think they just worry about the wear and tear. So to me, it's more of a Stanton question really than a Gallo question. Is he going to be a Gold Glove center fielder like he was in the corners? Probably not, but he's kind of a jumbo version of a Cody Bellinger to me. I mean, this guy's a great athlete. He can handle center field if Stanton was able to hold up his end of the bargain and be in left field. And if you could, I'm with you. And you problem solved. You DH Luke Voit every day and you go with that alignment, because it's not like, for as good of a career as he's had, it's not like the Brett Gardners of the world and some of these other fill-in outfielders have exactly lit the world on fire for the Yankees this year. So if Stanton can pull that off, that opens a lot of possibilities for them. And then all of a sudden you're looking at 5, 6, 7 major thumpers in the middle of that lineup who could, who are liable to hit 2 or 3 homers any given night.
And before we break away from standings and that sort of thing, you and I have followed the White Sox since we've been doing the show pretty closely. Mm-hmm. And the fact that the way they've handled the Athletics here in the last few nights, the White Sox actually seem like they keep getting better.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we're going to have the White Sox coming up next Friday. So I'm looking forward to getting a chance to see them. We haven't seen them since early in the season. We had them against the Twins, who are obviously supposed to be some of their bigger competition in the division, have been one of the more disappointing teams in the league. The last time we did a White Sox game, this time we'll get the Cubs, kind of the same thing before the season. You think that's a great matchup. Obviously not so much now, but I'll be very interested to see what Tony has to say when we get a chance to talk to him about some of the things you and I discussed last week, just kind of the evolution of this team and the way they've kind of changed their style as the roster has changed throughout the year based on injuries. So yeah, they've had so much churn on that roster, and they just keep getting better. Last time we talked about Jimenez a little bit. Now Luis Robert looks like he picked up right where he left off since coming off the IL. A couple of homers. I think he's hitting over 400 in a short sample. So yeah, they just keep getting better, and as long as that pitching staff can be healthy headed into the postseason, they've got plenty of options. And I know that the bullpen hasn't exactly worked out like we discussed last time. They've actually stuck with Hendricks in the back end, even though he was the one saying that he was more than willing to give way to Kimbrel to be the closer. So, assuming those two kind of get settled and they get that figured out in the back end, you've got to love what they've been doing offensively and how they've kind of been evolving. So, yeah, I'm with you. It's been very impressive to see how they've improved throughout the season, and I can't wait to talk to Tony next week and kind of get his take on how this team's come together.
What's your take on the Cardinals considering having conversations about an extension for the ageless Yadi Molina? Can you believe it?
I do believe it. And I get why a certain frustrated segment of the fan base thinks, what are we just going to play this guy till he's 45, 46? Because we all know that if there's a deal out there, Yadi's never going to hang it up on his own. But at this point, I think we've passed the point, even allowing yourself to think that, okay, why would they want to get away from him? I think that we're past the point of no return on that. The decision to move on from Yadi the point where you would have made that decision was when Carson Kelly was ready to go. And once they decided to move Kelly to bring in Goldschmidt, to me, put your chips all in on Yadi Molina finishing his career with the Cardinals at that point.
Yeah.
I know there was a little flare up last offseason where he, played the game where he was offended and he was going to look elsewhere, but he clearly wants to finish as a Cardinal. And I think all the moves they've made the last couple of years, you can't jump off of that plan halfway through. You don't trade away a guy like Carson Kelly because you're going to value Yadi's leadership and you want to make him a legacy player from, looking at it from more of a business standpoint. You don't go 3, 4, 5 years down that train and then say, well, we can't do one more year. So I expect him to be back. It doesn't surprise me at all. And, credit the Cardinals. I know it's frustrating to see for some fans at least, to see Yadi out there in the lineup as much as he is with the type of offensive player he is, but give the Cardinals credit for constantly having this churn of catchers, it seems, behind him. First it was, well, we can't make good on a guy like Carson Kelly. And now here comes Kisner. And maybe it just turns out that Kisner's the bridge from Kelly to Herrera, and eventually Herrera is the replacement. And Kisner really never gets a shot to be an everyday catcher with the Cardinals, which, does he have potential? Could he be a good, solid, everyday guy? Maybe, but I don't think he's such an intriguing player that fans need to be up in arms about Andrew Kisner not getting the shot if it means Yadi Molina's coming back for another year.
Agreed. You mentioned next week, but what's coming up next for MLB Network?
Yeah, we've got a little bit of a break here, and then next week we'll do another one of our CC games, which is going to be a really fun group. We're going to have Pedro Martinez and CC Sabathia together.
Wow.
Obviously, a Yankee Red Sox kind of dynamic there, and two experts on pitching, a future Hall of Famer and a current Hall of Famer, and they're going to be doing Padres Dodgers. So kind of an East Coast rivalry flair coming to a West Coast rivalry that'll be on the screen, and then the day after that, on Friday, we've got that Cubs-White Sox game that I mentioned, which is actually going to be an all-female broadcast, which we did a few weeks ago on YouTube, and it got a lot of press, and it'll actually be over the air this time on MLB Network. So looking forward to that, too.
And so any information folks get on MLB Network, if you like it, think that it came from Keith Costas.
And if you don't, it's just talent out of control. I can't wrangle him.
It's out of his control.
Exactly.
Keith, great visiting with you, and we'll see you next week.
All right, Raymer, sounds good.
And I'm Bob Ramsey. This is the Keith Costas Podcast.
Every day, Ameren, Illinois works to deliver reliable energy throughout the state to on-the-go families, in-the-know grandparents, and busy students. But did you know we also have ways to manage your energy? Paperless billing, outage notifications, pick a due date, auto pay, and so much more. So no matter who you are or how you use your energy, there's an option that's right for you. Learn more at amerenillinois.com/options.